there, my name is Scott Larson, and I am the creator and illustrator of the comic book series Visitations. Visitations is an independent comic book series which is the history of Chicago as seen through the eyes of the residents of the city's oldest cemetery. For the past few months, I've been interviewing different comic book creative people who have been kind enough to share their insights on how they got started in the business, what steps they took as they were going along, and a lot of different experience they've had while they've been in there. And I'm really excited tonight because I'm going to be able to talk to Dirk Manning. Dirk Manning is a really great writer who has worked on a number of different things. He created the Right or Wrong, a writer's guide to creating comics that was put out by Caliber and Bleeding Cool. He's written stuff for Image Comics, including Love Stories to Die For. He wrote The Legend of Oz, The Wicked West by the publisher Big Dog Inc. And he's done a lot of things on his own. And the first time I ever met Dirk, and he probably doesn't remember this, it was at C2E2 a number of years ago. And he was hosting a panel about how to get writers and illustrators together. And what he did was he took different writers in the room and he put them together with different illustrators who were in the room. And I had a chance to talk to him right afterwards over at his table in Artist Alley. And I handed him some of my samples and he looked at it and he said, "I like the cut of your jib." And right there, I knew I liked him a lot. So I'm going to bring him on and we're going to talk a little bit about where he started, what his background is, and what that's led to, and where he is going now. So Dirk, you are unmuted, so you can talk. And if you can turn on your video, that'd be great.
Let's do it. This is the big dramatic reveal. Okay, it says the host has stopped it. You just gotta let me be free, I guess.
Oh yeah, hold on one second. There you go.
Got a drum roll coming up here. Ta-da! I actually do remember that C2E2. It was for the Creator Connection panel. Mm-hmm. So
it was neat. It was really great, and that was in the early days of C2E2, correct?
Yeah. Gosh, I shudder to think how many years ago that was now, but it was several. So, but yeah, so it's good. Thank you for having me on, man. I really appreciate it. I appreciate what you're doing with these with this podcast, and the fact that you're choosing to have me on to talk about comics and everything else is appreciated.
Well, one of the things that I think is really interesting about you is it's not just that you send out newsletters to people, but anytime you're at a convention, we're at a convention together, you've always got 1 million people at your table. And Dirk, for anyone who has not met him at a convention, he dresses like Johnny Cash. He's always in black. And every image that's every photograph that's taken of him, he only shows from his eyes up, or from his nose up.
You can see why now, this is the quarantine life, kind of unshaven a little bit, twisted t-shirt on, but here's the classic, this is a much better look for me. I don't have a face for video normally, but for you, we'll make an exception.
Oh, thanks. So what's your earliest memory in comic books? What did you, do you remember the first comic book you ever got?
I really started, I was aware of comics. My great grandma had comics in the house and stuff like that a little bit. I think when she would watch my brother and I think she just probably picked up some like Archie comics at like the local drugstore or something like that. But I really didn't get into comics till I was a teenager. And the reason I did is because I was such a voracious reader. And I loved the idea that if you found something you liked, there'd be more of it every month. And that is just what I absolutely loved about the idea of comic books. And actually, I first got into comic books at my local skateboard shop. The skateboard shop, he had this just massive, oh gosh, racks and racks and racks of like all the new comics. It was like, oh my God, it was like, again, if you find something you like, you can, have new material possibly infinitely. So that's when I really got into it. And then from there, once I started reading comics that way, I started to really study the craft of how to make them and the unique structures and the unique ways that you can tell a story using the comic book medium, and fell in love with it. Like I said, I've always been a voracious reader. I've known from a very early age that I wanted to be a writer, or I guess, there's the joke that being a writer is a curse, not a job. So I
Mhm.
knew I was a writer, and I just fell in love with the medium. And I fell in love with how you can tell stories in this medium, the way you can utilize the medium to do long-term storytelling. And yeah, here we are, decades later, and I have, dozens of books to my name, and um, just living the dream.
Uh-huh. So, do you remember the first comic that you read?
The first one I bought, it was
Uh-huh.
Incredible Hulk. It was a Peter David 364. I believe it was 364. It was the first part of the Countdown storyline. And the reason I bought it here, I'll use my Google machine real quick to make sure. But I always want to say if it's 361 or 364, but I'm pretty positive it's 364. But the reason I liked it was twofold. One was that, yeah, it was 364.
Was that
One was that,
89 or 90?
what's that?
Was that 89 or 90?
Yes. Let's see here. So yes, it was December 1980. That's right. It would have been December 1989
I
because
remember
it
that
was
issue.
yeah, because it was Christmas time. It was right around Christmas time, and I was going in to spend my Christmas money to get some new stuff on my board. I had a Steve Caballero, and then I see the books. And what I liked about it is I remember two things. One, when I was younger, I would watch the Hulk television show.
Mhm.
But the other thing that really fascinated me was it was a 4-part story arc called Countdown, and they called it part 4 of 1. It was like, because they're counting it down. And I thought, I would love a good pun. When you look at my books like Right or Wrong, Tales of Mystery, things. I love stuff like that. So I'm like, this looks pretty interesting. Why is the Hulk gray? I have many questions, but really to me, what it came down to was that part 4 of 1. I'm like, I'll check this out, because if I dig it, I'll know I'll have at least 3 more months. Picked it up, read it in the car on the way home, and there I was. Shortly thereafter that, some kids I knew in school got me into the first 3 comics I pretty much read, the first 3 graphic novels, after that Hulk issue, in pretty short order were, and then maybe like a little Ghost Rider in there too. Because I wanted to start with the number 1 of something. So I think Ghost Rider started around that time too. So I got into Ghost Rider. So I could start at the beginning, not knowing that there had been previous Ghost Riders. But it was Watchmen, Dark Knight Returns, and The Crow. And
Mhm.
that is a hell of an introduction to the medium,
Mhm.
you know. Um, so that's really what then helped me discover the power of the medium. And in Right or Wrong, Volume 1, I talk about what it was that I learned from those 3 books, um, how I took different lessons from those books to start applying that to making my own work. And I've been here ever since, like a bad penny. It won't go away.
So you said that you had read a lot. What were you reading before that? Were you reading
Yeah,
novels? Were you reading history? Were you reading?
yeah, mainly novels, short stories. I've always been a horror kid,
Uh-huh.
so Stephen King, Edgar Allan Poe, although not horror per se, Ray Bradbury, things like that. Some science fiction stuff, Jules Verne, Harlan Ellison, anything I could get my hands on. But mainly I was just a horror kid. If it looked scary or spooky, cool. Like, oh, here's the stand. Read that straight through. Oh, here's it, just voracious. It's funny, I was talking to my parents the other day, and they were joking about how by the time I was in 6th grade, I was out reading everyone in the family. And my parents are not unintelligent people by any stretch of the imagination, but I've just wired that way. I've always been a very voracious reader, and yeah, just nonstop. To this day, I have to have books I have not read yet in the house, or I get antsy.
Mhm.
If I want to read something new, so.
So what made you decide? What made you decide to not just to write comics,
Mhm,
but to go off on your own and write comics? My assumption is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong,
mhm.
but my assumption is that you did something on your own first before you like did anything for Big Dog Inc. or
Right,
Image or
right.
anywhere else.
Yeah, the image stuff was creator owned, but yeah, I again, not getting into comics till I was around, 13, 14 years as a teenager, wherever it was. 14 years old. I approached my writing career in comics as any other prose author would. I have stories I want to tell, and I want to put books out and tell them. I've never been overly fascinated with the idea of playing with other people's toys.
Mhm.
You know, anybody can write a Batman story, at least one. He's an archetypal character. It's not complicated, you know, and that's not to take away from people who write really good Batman stories, but anybody can do one. Anybody can do a Spider-Man story. You know, I mean, they're archetypal characters. And to me, though, I wanted to tell my own stories. So with my first work with Nightmare World, to me, that was just a natural progression of, again, I was a horror kid growing up. I'm a horror fan to this day. I love short stories. And again, I talk about this a lot in Right or Wrong One, but I really felt that short stories and horror comics were very ghettoized in the comic book industry. And I'm like, here I am. No offense. Again, one of the first comics I read was The Incredible Hulk, a superhero book. Cool, I get it. But when I then go to this big wall of comics and everything's superheroes, I'm like, I want some other stuff, you know. Give me some of that old, you know, EC comic style stuff, you know. Give me the, you know, things like that. So when I did Nightmare World, I really set out to demonstrate not only the power of the short story, because it's easier to write a long story than a short story. You know, writing a good short story is a skill set in and of itself. And again, looking back, I realize how I won't say surefire, we'll say this was. But I also wanted to help legitimize horror in comics, because at that point, short stories were ghettoized. I felt horror was very ghettoized in comics. So when I did Nightmare World, my first series, which eventually got picked up by Image Comics, that was my goal, is to like, kind of like, hey, everybody, hey, there's other stuff we can do. And obviously other people were making comics, and I'm not trying to say I was the savior of the horror comic, but rather that is what I wanted to do, was broaden the reach of that and broaden the impact of that, and contribute to the type of stories that I wanted to see out there. And then thankfully, you know, and I'm very grateful for this, a lot of other people have too. You know, Nightmare World's been an evergreen book for almost 20 years now, you know. And a lot of my other work, Tales of Mystery and Love Stories to Die For, you know, those are horror themed books and they do very well. Haunted Highons with Twisted for Source Point Press, just this year got nominated for 3 Ringo Awards. Mm-hmm. You know, and this is a book about ghost hunters. So to me, that's just what it was about. You know, it was like being authentic to myself as a writer, and then just following my path of the types of things that I would want to do. And I've just been very fortunate that what I have done has been fairly well received for a while.
How do you deal with the production line aspect of comics? You're a writer. Mm-hmm. And you're writing your own stuff. And I had mentioned, you know, about the looking for artists and creators and artists, or writers and artists going together and blah, 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 blah. And I'll tell you one of the things real quick that I found when I was doing comics was I was part of that production line. You know, I was the second person in the production line because I was a penciler. Right. And one of the reasons why I went independent was because other people kept destroying my work. And so I decided that if anyone was going to destroy my work, I was going to do it.
It's going to be me, right?
But how do you deal with that if you're running your own shop, so to speak, and you're a writer? How are you dealing with that production line? How are you dealing? Not only how are you reaching out to people, but what happens when things don't quite look the way you want them to look? You know, my assumption is you're not just writer; you're also editor for the most part.
Yeah, no, that is true. I do work with. Over the last couple of years, I've started working with, you know, several other editors, which is crucial, you know. But when I was starting out, it was very, I was everything, you know. I was the guy that I was supervising the line art, the inks, the colors, the letters, things like that. And, you know, you just handle it. I was the guy that had to coordinate everything. This was before web storage was even widely available. So, like we're emailing files back and forth to each other. Occasionally, people were emailing their artwork on like CDs that we'd burn them onto a CD, then
Mhm.
postal mail them. You know, uh, I'm to the point now that I do work with editors, Adrena Joe, Leah Letterman, are two fantastic editors that I've got to work with on a couple occasions. And then working with a publisher like Source Point Press, who's an amazing publisher, who has people that can help do like the design work and things like that. But Jim Reddington, who I worked with for years on Nightmare World, the first act of Tales of Mystery, um, he was like my design guy, and I would work with him to help like design the stuff, and you really defer the artists a lot. But that being said, once you get to the point, and you know this, of making the comic, it goes quick. So I would do a lot of back end research to make sure that I knew who I was going to be working with. And I tell young writers all the time, young in their career, not necessarily their age, but you gotta suit your work to who you're working with, and it's just such a crucial thing to do. You have to know people's strengths. You have to know what their strengths are, what maybe their weaknesses are. Play to their strengths, work around the weaknesses, so that the finished product makes everyone look good. If there's someone that really likes to draw uh, beautiful women and monsters with tentacles, that's their skill set. And there's a time to push people, and obviously that can get to be a very creepy combination if you're not careful. Well, it's maybe not the greatest example to use, but there's times to push an artist out of their comfort zone. Just like as a writer, there's times to get yourself out of your comfort zone. However, it's really important to vet who you're working with, know what they bring to the table, know what they offer, and then really play to their strengths accordingly.
So I want to back up a little bit.
Sure.
So you talked about how first thing you read was the Hulk. The second thing was Dark Knight and Watchmen and the Crow, right? Did you go from there and start deep diving into like the history of comics?
That's a good
Because you
question.
mentioned the EC horror stuff.
Yeah.
And that's what made that pop into my head. It's like, okay, well, that stuff, obviously.
Yeah,
So,
I had a very good, and he's a friend of mine to this day, local comic shop guy. And knowing that I wanted horror comics, oh, have you checked out Bernie Wrightson before? I'm like, no, who's Bernie Wrightson? And then like, oh, you read Jennifer by Bernie Wrightson and Bruce Jones, and you're like, oh my God, this is one of the best things I've ever read. Like, oh, so you like that Bruce Jones? I'm like, yeah. They're like, here's 50 other Bruce Jones things, like 50 of them, and so I had a guy who really helped guide me in that to a large extent. But like the Crow was foisted into my hands. Watchmen, one of the metal kids at school was always drawing the smiley face with the pin with the blood on it. I'm like, what is that? Like, oh, that's Watchmen. So I go to my comic shop, and this is one of the first times I met this guy, became one of my dear friends. And I said, yeah, there's this book Watchmen. He's like, oh yeah, here. And he had all 12 issues like bundled up. And he's like, here, just $12, just take it. $12, here you go, $1 each. Just you got to read this. I'm like, okay, but it'd be like $12. I'm like, well, okay, And I read it, and I say this all the time, and almost to the point I almost feel bad saying it now. The story in Watchmen is not what makes Watchmen great, in my opinion. It's a fairly pedestrian story. I would even go as far as to say with a couple of really troublesome bits, and an ending from the outer limits, but the craft that Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons and how they told the story and how they juxtaposed the words in the pictures, and the fearful symmetry issue where the whole issue is like a Rorschach, page, literally, the symmetry to the whole. There's a lot of stuff they did that for years I would go back and reread Watchmen, not so much for the story, but the storytelling, the craft of the storytelling. Dave Gibbons is a master illustrator. But when I first saw his art, I was like,
Mhm.
Kind of boring. You know? But then you start to recognize just how good he is. And Alan Moore, of course, obviously, you know, I mean, say what you will of some of his thematic elements that he sometimes focuses on. Uh, one of the best, if not the best, comic book writer of all time. Just pound for pound, I think that's a borderline indisputable that he would be easily on the Mount Rushmore, if not the biggest head on the Mount Rushmore in regards to the talent and what he's done with the craft. You know, okay, you could argue for Eisner obviously as well, but whatever. Let's just put him in top 4. Done. So, and then it was Harvey Pekar, you know, American Splendor fame and things like that, who I think years later I discovered the quote that perfectly encapsulated it to me. And he said, "Comics are words and pictures, and you can do anything with words and pictures." And that's it. You know, a lot of people, one of the mistakes I see a lot of writers make, and not just young writers, is they treat a comic book like a movie broken down on the page. It's not. It doesn't. I mean, comic books are still images. These images do not move. And as such, you should honor and respect, you know, the medium. And even when you're doing things like having a conversation or something like that, you know, you can portray the illusion of movement, but you need to recognize the fact that these do not move. Or when I was talking to someone the other day about it, what was it? It doesn't matter. The specific example doesn't matter. But how people in comics tend to do this thing where like someone hears something, like, okay, I can't hear that. There shouldn't be like a snap. Well, what was that? Like, that's a movie thing. Can you do it better in a comic? And that's not to say that you can't have someone make noise in a comic book, but you really just need to recognize it's words and pictures. How do you juxtapose the words and pictures? How do you break a story into 300 still images, or, you know, whatever you're going to do for the sake of your story? How are you going to most effectively use dialogue? How are you going to control the pacing? You know, which ultimately, as a comic writer, you don't control the pacing. You could pick this book up and go like this, you know, and think, oh, that's the reveal. You can't do that in a movie. I mean, you could, I guess, theoretically watch it fast forward or something, but, you know, in movies, you can force the viewer to focus on something.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do that in a comic book. So you have to engross them in different ways and get them to study it the way that you want them to. So, yeah, that stuff I still think about to this day, you know, except I'm working on Right or Wrong Volume 2 right now. And we still touch on those craft elements a bit that are just crucial, I think, to using the medium the best way possible to tell the story you want to tell.
Have you read Scott McCloud's books?
Absolutely. In fact, it's sitting right here above my desk. I got my reference books up here that some of them I haven't looked at in 10 or 15 years, you know, but I look at them every day. Yeah, understanding comics is crucial, game-changing stuff. Even as a writer, as someone that doesn't draw. I work with artists from all over the world. I don't draw myself. But yeah, understanding comics is the most minimal foundational thing I think any writer should read in regards to making comic books.
I would agree with that. I remember when I first read it, and I was taking an art class.
Mm-hmm.
I was taking a class in modern art, and having those two things together really opened up my eyes.
Oh my God!
And,
I can only imagine.
And it really helped me understand things in a way that I hadn't before. Real quick, going back to Watchmen, I had to read that book 3 times before I understood what the point of it was. Because it was just, I read it the first time, and everyone had been talking about for years and years and years. And I was like, Is that it?
Right.
And then the second time was years later, and I was like, oh, I'll try this. And I read it, and I was just like, is that it? But then once you start seeing what's going on, and it's, you know, it's like a piece of literature.
Yeah, take the time to read the back matter too. Don't just like, oh, there's too many words here, and skip that. Right.
Oh yeah, that was, you don't want to read that, and especially if you're like tired or you're young or whatever. It's like, but I think that Watchmen is like reading old English literature. You know, it's like if you're reading Moby Dick and the guy and he goes on for 5 pages about how there is a sign swinging in the wind, that's
Right.
what Watchmen is. And it took me a while to figure that out, but once I figured it out, it all kind of came together. Um, Tell me about your convention experiences. So you've been doing conventions for how long? First of all, how long have you been doing conventions for?
I would say my convention presence picked up considerably in the last 8 years, give or take. I'd have to go back and actually like look, but I would say in the last 8 years is when I really started to get to the point where I was starting to really do a lot of conventions.
Mm-hmm. And then real quick, I want to go further back than that. What year was your first work published?
Well, Nightmare World started as an online comic series in 2002. So I was one of the OGs of the online comic or web comic movement. So early 2000s, and been going ever since. We got picked up by Image, I want to say, in 2000. I think we started there online 2007-ish or so, and maybe got picked up 2009. But yeah, since the early 2000s, I've been going. It's crazy. I somebody look behind me and like a spinner rack filling with all my own work. And that's my goal. And I'm getting pretty close. Got a little bit to go yet, but to have a spinner rack filled with my own work. And I think, gosh, how am I getting that close? I'm like, well, I've been doing comics since the early 2000s, and create our own work and like chipping it out, and doing a reel, not putting like 5 versions of the book down 5 racks. Like, no, I want this to be the official thing. So yeah, it's been a minute.
Mm-hmm. So right now, if I'm at a convention where Dirk Manning is, there's a million people at your table. And that's just true. I'm not saying that, but
I'm very fortunate.
I mean,
I'm very fortunate.
9 times
People
out of 10, when I actually get a chance to walk around, I'll walk over and it'll be like, yeah, I'm not bothering him. And I think there was one time you and I both were both in that Unlawful Good book that Heather Antos had edited. And I think one time someone was actually buying the book and I walked up and I was like, oh, I drew that. Do you want me to sign it for you?
Yeah, I remember that. Yes. Gosh, that was funny. Yeah.
But that was an example of it's like, oh, I can actually say hi here.
Yeah.
But so what was your first convention like? I mean, what made you decide to do a convention? What was your first convention and what was it like?
I would originally do, back in the day, Wizard World Chicago, and I would do, as a professional, and then I would do Pittsburgh Comic-Con. And Pittsburgh Comic-Con is because it was closer to my buddy Josh Ross, who did a lot of comic work with, and Wizard World Chicago because that was like a big show, and we had Motor City and stuff like that as well, but I didn't want to do shows that were local to me yet because I kind of wanted to ply my trade, So like Motor City was like the first Comic Con I ever went to, but I wanted to wait to do more of a hometown show till I had really kind of, learned my way around a little bit. And the reason to get out there was to start promoting my work, even when Nightmare World was primarily an online series, I would do like limited edition little like ash cans basically of the work and try to drive them to the website so that hopefully when I came back the next year, I would have more printed work. But those were back in the self-publishing days as well. I started by self-publishing my own work and eventually got picked up by some smaller publishers and then went on to Image Comics and went on to Devil's Due and now I'm at Source Point Press. So, you kind of go down this journey as you go. But to me, doing conventions was just about getting the word out about your books. The end. I'm there to work.
Right.
A lot of people go there to party, things like that, and that's just not what I'm there for. I'm there to work. Maybe if I'm lucky, I'll get some good ice cream if I'm out of town somewhere, and then that's it. That's always been what conventions have been about to me. Just go there, build awareness of your brand. I'm to the point now where I have enough content to make money, to expose new people to my work, get people access to my work, and yeah.
So what year was your first one though? Do you remember?
Gosh. I'm going to say 2000. It was crazy. I was at a show and someone brought up the brochure, like the program. And I realized it was one of the first cons I ever did. I want to say 2004, 2005, I believe. I'd have to go back and double check. That's a good question. Put me on the
Okay.
spot.
And then were you scared getting a table by yourself the first time? Or were you sharing a table with somebody, or how did that
In
work?
Pittsburgh, I would share with Josh Ross. So that helped. It's frightening, but you realize you just got to go do it. You know, it's like no one's going to love your babies like you will. No one's going to promote your work like you will. And the big thing for me is I've never been one for the hard sell. You know, I'm never one of those guys that like flags people down out of the aisle or, you know, hey, let me tell you about my book. No. My thing is you set up the books on your table in a way that they're upright, they're vertical. A lot of them are anyway. And they will see what I have to offer. And if they look at it, I'll talk to them about it. I'll talk about my books all day, you know. But to me, it was just a situation where I mean, it's frightening. Believe it or not, I'm a very introverted person, except for when I'm working, when I'm doing stuff like this. I'm a writer. I would love it if I could just put my books out, people buy 1 million of them, and I could stay home and write all the time. But that's not the way the world works. I don't have a machine behind me like Marvel or DC to exploit the IP and then push them out there or whatever. So yeah, do it yourself. And that's what it came down to. I just recognized pretty early on, okay, I'm doing really good stuff with some really good people. And that's not cocky. That's just, that's my feelings on it. It's very high quality. The fact that Nightmare World still sells 20 years later. Any show I go to, people buy Nightmare World. It's 20-year-old property. People are still buying it, you know, fresh off the table, you know. But I recognize that it being high quality work, it being good work, was not necessarily enough to get people to check it out. So I had to be available, and I had to be standing, and I had to be smiling, and then people see the work. I'm like, hey, if anything looks interesting, I'd be happy to tell you about it. And anybody that's come to see me at a show will tell you 99 times out of 100, if someone comes up to my table, I'll just say, if anything looks interesting, feel free to check it out. Like, oh, what's Haunted Highons? What's Hope? What's Nightmare World? What's Tales Mystery? What's Lost Dreams of Nightmare? I'll tell them about it. And if they're interested, I'll see if they want to buy it. But it's like, oh, well, I can't stand horror stuff, right? You know, okay, well, cool. You're welcome to look around. I do mainly horror, and you know, but you know, I'm not gonna be offended if you don't see anything you like. And it's funny because sometimes people almost get like put off by that. Like, what do you mean? I'm like, I do mainly horror. If you don't like horror, I said, don't get me wrong. A lot of people who don't like horror like my stuff anyway, but I tell them it's completely your discretion. I'm like, well, no, maybe I want to check something out. Cool. Tell you about the books, pick one, you know. So, but it also takes a certain amount of confidence, probably isn't the word I want to use, but I guess I'm going to use it anyway. Confidence in the fact that you're pot committed, you know. I've shown up, I'm at the show, I paid for the table, or if I was brought in as a guest, I was brought in as a guest, whatever the situation is. I'm here now, and the cards are going to fall where they may. And I'm either going to find my audience or I wouldn't. And I always say, Chicago is the town that made me. Chicago is the town that put me over. They're a horror town through and through. I'm a horror guy. Chicago made me. And it was after Chicago that Pittsburgh and Detroit, and then now New York and Seattle and what have you, and you know, Traverse City, all these other shows, those other towns that I do very well at. But Chicago's a horror town. Chicago's the town that made me. That let me get in there, start talking to people about my work, hone my craft, and really build the foundation upon which my career still stands to this day.
And where are you from now? I mean, where are you actually from? Obviously, you're not from Chicago.
No, I grew up just south of Detroit, Michigan.
Okay.
So it was just a couple hour drive and the big city. You know?
No, I actually knew that, but I didn't feel that people watching this would know that. So I thought I'd bring that up.
I'm from Chicago, but I'm not from Chicago.
Yeah, I'm deep in Chicago. The thing that I found with conventions is you're there to make friends. And I'm not talking about, going to the bar and hanging out and making friends that way. But the people who are coming by your table are, my feeling is that they're looking for an experience, and they're looking to have fun, and and I remember being on the other side of the table. And
Mhm.
so I don't do a hard sell either. Um, but I talk to people,
Mhm.
and that's what I think is the most important. And even if they walk away and they don't buy a book, it doesn't really matter to me. It's always nice to sell a book, but it's better to make friends with somebody, because the books will be there, and the books will be there at the next convention or the
Gotcha.
convention after that. Um, and so that's what I found.
Yeah, I talk about this in Right or Wrong too, that ultimately a hard sell sells you a book. Treating people well can get you many book sales. One book sale versus many book sales. And ultimately people they don't remember what you have on your table as much as they remember how you make them feel, you
Mhm.
know, and you got to treat people well. And then of course there's people that, respond to that in different ways and things like that. And so be it. But at the end of the day, you just try to treat people well,
Mhm.
not everyone at a show is a walking ATM machine from whom I will extract dollar bills. Not the point. Rather, if you like horror, or if you want to learn how to do more about writing comics, or whatever other stuff, you're a juggalo, or whatever the reason is, that if there's something on my table that may interest you, I would like to introduce you to it. And you're right, people come to the show and they like to buy directly from creators because they're also buying a little bit of your time.
Mhm.
They want to, come get a picture and stuff like that, and that's an honor. And like you said, I always remember when I was a teenager going to Motor City Comic Con and meeting Jim O'Barr, and I got to meet the guy that made one of
Mhm.
my favorite books. And now, last year he did the cover to one of my upcoming books for me. you know but I'll never forget, like, Jim O'Barr being so kind to me and stuff like that, and this little 15-year-old kid just sitting there booth barnacling at his table, just talking to him, and people
Mhm.
come up, and I mean, he could have just told me to get lost at any time, but he didn't. And
Well, there are people who do that.
and honestly, sometimes you have to, if someone is inhibiting your ability to make money at a show.
Mhm.
That there's a business aspect to this. Like I said, when people buy a book from you, they're also buying a little bit of your time. Cool, but you're buying a finite amount of time, and then, like you said, you walk by my table, seat to eat to. I always have people there, but I'm also always moving people through. Not that I don't like spending time with them, not that I don't like catching up with my friends, but that's one, like, hey, let's catch up at the bar afterwards, or hey, let's grab dinner, or whatever it may be, because I'm there to work. And there's people that want that opportunity to come pick up a book, come say hi, and nothing breaks my heart more when someone's like, oh, I came by your table 3 times, you're always busy. I'm like, should have stopped for a second. Let me see that you're there, and we can catch up. People don't stay at my table for 20 minutes, usually. It's just a few minutes, but just wave or something, and, like, we'll bring you over. We can catch up. So um but yeah, it's work, and it's business, and you're
Mhm.
right. I never forget what it was like being on that other side of that table, and you treat everyone that comes to you with respect and with courtesy. And yeah, I've been very fortunate to meet some very good people that way.
I have as well. I know we're running out of time, so I would like you, and I'm sure you'd be happy to do so. Talk a little bit about the Kickstarter that's running right now.
Yes, yes. It's actually going till October 1st. My new anthology, Buried But Not Dead, Lost Tales Volume 1. This is a collection of stories that I've done for various anthologies over the years. I think this is a perfect, I guess, bookend to how we started this conversation. I mainly write creator-owned work. And I have sometimes done stories for various other anthologies over the years that are now in print. I did a story with Riley Rossmo for his Dias de la Mortis anthology. Riley Rossmo is one of my all-time favorite artists. He did Proof. He worked on Batman Who Laughs most recently. Great guy. he had me be one of the writers he wrote a story for his anthology, or he drew a story that I wrote for his anthology. It's out of print. Repeat that several other times. I've done stories with Alejandro Aragon, Austin McKinley, Jan Apple, Mark Winters, Sally Scott, David Miller, you know, all these people that have done these really cool short stories, and they're out of print, or in some cases have never seen print. So Buried But Not Dead, you go to Kickstarter, just go to, look up Buried But Not Dead. This was my collecting all those stories, putting them in a gorgeous new cover by Jan Apple. And my plan was just to, do a little surprise book drop, which is pretty much what I did. I gave, I think, a couple weeks notice tops. By the way, new books coming out, everybody, which normally people know I hype books like a year in advance, like an author. But I did a surprise drop on this book release, 15-day quick starter campaign, out the door, figured, okay, cool. We'll get funded in 15 days, printed book, awesome. We are currently just shy, as I talk to you now, we're a little bit shy of $12,000 in pre-sales, which blows me away. As such, we've unlocked so many stretch goals. The reason I bring this up is the book is now a Kickstarter exclusive hardcover. It's got 2 bonus stories. It's got a bookmark of the cover, a book plate signed by me and the cover artist, and we're actually working on adding now a 9th story to the book before the campaign ends, which I'm very hopeful we will get to. So yeah, people can check it out. I appreciate it. The book is $20 hardcover with all those bonuses, free shipping in the US. This was just, again, meant to be like a $20 holler. Yep, out the door. So the other thing is, because there's not conventions right now, actually my whole library, let me do this. My whole library of work, there's books that people normally would have gotten at conventions, for example. They can now buy these as add-ons on the Kickstarter page as well. The convention prices are cheaper. The 4 Nightmare Worlds, the 4 Tales of Mystery, Hope, on Hions, Love Stories to Die For, all these. So you can add those on to your pledges as well if you want. Otherwise, you can get Buried But Not Dead for $20. Kickstarter exclusive hardcover, out the door. The triple threat, you can get any 3 books for $40, which is insane, super cheap. And you can even get, I'll say this before I go, you can get Buried But Not Dead, every one of these books right here. So it'd be 13 books altogether, 13 graphic novels or 12 graphic novels and Right or Wrong, for $125 free shipping.
So let me ask you this real quick. So let's say somebody watches this on October 2nd.
Yep.
Will you have those books at upcoming conventions, or can people send you an email and be like, hey, I'd really like to buy one of those books?
It will be available in mass distribution later. You won't be able to get the Kickstarter exclusive hardcover, but what I would encourage you people to do is they can go to dirkmanning.com, go to my Facebook, Instagram, Twitter at Dirk Manning. They'll be able to get, if you go to dirkmanning.com, you can sign up for my monthly newsletter, which you mentioned. Otherwise, follow me on social media. I tend to do a campaign or 2 a year, usually offering those hardcover exclusives. Dirkmanning.com has my convention schedule when conventions return. I'm active on social media, and people can stay in touch and kind of be in the loop. But yeah, like you said, drop me a line too. You never know. Things happen. Maybe there'll just happen to be an extra book you can pick up. You never know.
That sounds great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put all of Dirk's information into the description of this video on YouTube. So all of that information is, yes, right down there. Although right now, if anyone's watching, which they probably aren't, it's not there, but it will be. So, and with that, I think we're going to end it right there. I know you've got another appointment, so we're going to let you go. Thank you very, very, very much for coming on and doing this. And
this was, like I said, this was wonderful, man. I really appreciate it. It was good to catch up with you. I didn't get to see you at Chicago this year, obviously, and things are, a little crazy right now. So thank you very much.
Oh, sure.
And thank you for all of you watching as well. At Dirk Manning, stay in touch. And thank you, Scott. I appreciate your time very much, man. Thank you.
Oh, sure. Thanks. And then I'm going to end this live video right now. Thanks so much, everybody.